Regret doesn't hit them when you cry, and I know that sounds cruel, because when you're the one hurting, your tears feel like the loudest proof in the world. Your tears feel like evidence. Your tears feel like, how can you not see what this is doing to me? But for an avoidant, your tears often land as pressure, not clarity. They don't interpret your pain as a sacred signal to step closer. They interpret it as a demand to feel something they don't know how to handle. And when they feel demanded, they shut down, they detach, they go numb. Not because your feelings aren't valid, but because their nervous system is trained to escape intensity instead of meeting it. So when you cry, you are still emotionally present in the relationship. You're still engaged. You're still reaching. You're still trying to pull closeness out of someone who has learned to protect themselves by avoiding closeness. Your crying, your explaining, your long messages, your "can we please talk" still keeps the connection alive. Even if it's painful, it's still contact. It's still energy. It's still proof that they matter to you. And as long as they have proof, they don't fully feel the consequences. They might feel annoyed, overwhelmed, guilty for a second, but they can quickly soothe themselves with a dangerous comfort. They're still here. That's the hidden truth. Your emotional chasing, even when it's coming from love, becomes a safety net for someone who fears accountability, because the avoidant learns a pattern they can pull away, and you will pull them back. They can go cold, and you will bring warmth. They can disappear emotionally, and you will keep trying to revive the connection, and then you wonder why they seem unaffected. You wonder why they look calm while you're breaking. It's because your effort is doing the work of keeping the relationship from feeling over to them. Regret begins when that effort stops. Regret begins when your nervous system finally decides, I'm done auditioning for basic respect. Regret begins when your silence becomes consistent enough that they can't treat it like a mood. Because an avoidant can ignore your pain in the moment by labeling it as too much, or by telling themselves you're emotional, dramatic, overthinking, or needy. But they can't label your absence as too much. Absence is not an argument. Absence is not a paragraph. Absence is a new reality, and reality is what hits them. When you stop explaining, you remove the thing that kept them emotionally comfortable, your availability. You remove the reassurance that no matter how they behave, you will still be accessible. You remove the emotional labor that kept the connection warm even when they were cold. And now the room gets quiet. And in that quiet, they finally have to sit with the one thing they've been avoiding: consequences. Because while you were explaining, they still had options. They could reply later, they could breadcrumb, they could give half effort and watch you accept it. They could say, let's not talk about this right now, and trust that you'd still be there tomorrow. But when you stop explaining, the dynamic shifts. They don't feel your love as a cushion anymore. They feel the empty space where your love used to be. And at first, what they feel is not romance, it's discomfort. They reach for their phone out of habit. They check the chat. They expect the little ping of your emotional presence. They expect you to break first, because you always broke first. And when you don't, a quiet anxiety starts rising in them. Not because they suddenly became secure, but because the script is gone. The pattern is broken. The predictable supply of your attention is no longer available. This is why your silence is louder than your tears. Tears can be dismissed. Tears can be blamed. Tears can be framed as weakness. Tears can be turned into a reason to pull away. But silence doesn't ask them to do anything. Silence doesn't beg. Silence doesn't defend itself. Silence simply removes access. And when access is removed, their nervous system starts searching for control. That's when the thoughts begin. Why aren't they texting? Did they move on? Are they done for real? Did I push too far? Did I lose them? And notice what's happening here. For the first time, the focus shifts from judging your emotions to confronting their behavior. Because without your explanations, they can't distract themselves by arguing with your points. Without your messages, they can't twist the conversation into, you're asking for too much. Without your emotional urgency, they can't keep seeing you as the pursuer and themselves as the prize. Your silence removes the roles. And when the roles collapse, regret has space to enter. Regret is not just missing you. Regret is the slow realization that they took something for granted. Regret is the recognition that your love was not automatic forever. Regret is the moment they understand that you were not just emotional. You were responding to being treated like an option. Regret is the moment they finally feel what they caused, because they no longer have your reactions to hide behind. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, why didn't my pain change them? It's not because you weren't worth changing for. It's because pain alone doesn't change an avoidant. Pain can be escaped. Pain can be minimized. Pain can be blamed on you. But silence backed by self-respect cannot be argued with. It forces a choice. It forces reality. It forces the truth to land. And that is why regret doesn't start when you cry. Regret starts when you stop explaining. Avoidants often don't feel the relationship in real time, and that is one of the most heartbreaking truths for someone who loved them sincerely. You are sitting there feeling everything, noticing every shift, carrying every silence, trying to keep the connection alive, and they look fine, they look calm, they look distant. They look like they can turn it off and move on. And if you don't understand avoidant psychology, you start believing the worst story. I didn't matter. But the truth is more complex and, in a strange way, more painful. You mattered enough to activate their defenses, so while you were present, they weren't fully feeling you. They were managing you. An avoidant learns early that closeness can be dangerous. They may not consciously remember it, but their nervous system remembers. It remembers that needing someone can lead to disappointment, that depending can lead to rejection, that being vulnerable can lead to shame. So they develop a strategy, not a conscious plan, but a survival reflex: keep enough distance to feel safe. That's why they love in a way that looks inconsistent. They come close, then they pull away. They warm up, then they go cold. They give you a glimpse of tenderness, then they disappear. It's not always because they don't care, it's because caring brings risk, and risk triggers retreat. So while you are in the relationship, their system is busy doing two things at the same time: wanting connection and protecting from connection. That internal conflict is exhausting, and the easiest way to resolve it is to shut down emotions. When they shut down, they can still function. They can still go to work, still laugh with friends, still scroll, still live. But emotional depth feels like pressure. It feels like responsibility. It feels like being seen too clearly. And being seen too clearly is what their nervous system has been trained to avoid. That's why in real time, when you ask for clarity, they freeze. When you bring up feelings, they become vague. When you want accountability, they get defensive. It isn't that they don't understand your words, it's that your words trigger their internal alarms. Their brain starts scanning for exits. Their mind starts focusing on flaws. They suddenly become confused about the relationship, not because they don't feel anything, but because their fear is louder than their love. And here's the part that people misunderstand: when they pull away, they often feel relief. That relief is like a nervous system reward for creating distance from intimacy. They feel less pressure, less expectation, less vulnerability, and that relief tricks them into thinking they made the right choice. They think, see, I'm calmer without this. They think, I needed space. They think, it wasn't right. But relief is not truth. Relief is just what the body feels after escaping something it interprets as a threat. So as long as you are still present, still explaining, still trying, their system stays in defense mode. Their defenses stay up because the relationship is still demanding something: communication, effort, consistency, emotional presence. That demand, even if it's healthy, triggers their avoidant strategy. They focus on distance. They focus on controlling the pace. They focus on not being pulled in too deep. That's why they often don't feel it while it's happening. But when you go silent, something shifts. When you stop chasing, the pressure disappears. When you stop asking for clarity, the demand disappears. When you stop trying to fix it, the intensity disappears. And in that quiet, their nervous system finally relaxes. The defenses don't need to stay as high, because there's no immediate closeness to manage. And this is the strange paradox of avoidance: they can feel more safely when the relationship is not right in front of them, demanding a response. So after you step back, after the noise quiets, the feelings start rising like waves that were held under the surface. The mind begins to replay, not to romanticize at first, but to understand. They remember moments. They remember your effort. They remember your warmth. They remember the way you tried. And those memories hit them harder now because they are no longer attached to the pressure of having to respond correctly. In absence, they can idealize you. In absence, they can finally recognize your value without feeling trapped by it. In absence, they can feel the loss without the immediate fear of intimacy. This is why regret is delayed. It's not that they didn't care, it's that they couldn't fully process care while they were busy defending against it. They are often emotionally late because their system only permits feeling when it feels safe. And safety to an avoidant nervous system often looks like distance. That's why the missing you message comes weeks later. That's why the sudden softening happens when you've already started healing. That's why the realization feels like it arrives too late. Because they didn't feel the consequence when you were crying, they felt overwhelmed. They didn't feel the consequence when you were explaining, they felt pressured. They feel the consequence when you are gone enough that the relationship no longer feels like a demand. That's when the silence becomes a mirror. And the mirror doesn't just show them you're gone. It shows them what they did. It shows them what they avoided. It shows them the cost. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, how could they treat me like that and look fine? The answer is not that you were nothing. The answer is that their defenses were doing what they were built to do. But defenses cannot protect someone from reality forever. Eventually the noise stops, the distractions fade, the phone stays quiet, and that is when the feelings they buried start to speak. The first layer of regret isn't love, it's discomfort. And that's important because it helps you stop romanticizing the early signs and start reading the psychology correctly. When an avoidant begins to feel the consequences of how they treated you, they don't instantly turn into a poetic, emotionally mature person. They don't suddenly become secure. They don't suddenly wake up and say, I understand everything now. The first thing that hits them is not romance, it's the disturbance of a broken pattern. It's the uneasy feeling that something they relied on is no longer available. It's the subtle panic of losing access to the person who always made the connection feel alive. Discomfort shows up quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in through the routine. They reach for their phone without thinking. They scroll their notifications. They open the chat thread. They stare at the last message. And for a second, there's nothing. No new text, no emotional pulse, no proof that you're still there. And their system doesn't know what to do with that, because they were used to your presence being a guarantee. This is where people get confused. They see avoidance acting fine, publicly, and think that means they're unaffected. But discomfort doesn't always show on the outside. An avoidant can post, laugh, work, flirt, and still feel a private itch they can't scratch. Because the discomfort isn't about missing you like a soulmate at first. It's about missing the stability you provided without them having to earn it. Your attention used to regulate their emotional world. Even if they didn't admit it, even if they acted independent, your availability was a safety net. You were the person who would respond, explain, soften, forgive. You were the one who would keep the thread from snapping. And when you stop doing that, the first thing they feel is the absence of that safety net. So their mind starts searching for control. This is why they check your social media. This is why they lurk. This is why they suddenly remember little details. This is why they scroll through old photos. This is why they might ask mutual friends about you. This is why they reappear with a casual hey, as if nothing happened. They are not necessarily ready to repair. They are trying to reduce discomfort. They are trying to close the open loop in their nervous system. They want reassurance that they still matter, that they still have access, that they didn't permanently lose you. Because here is the hidden truth. Many avoidants do not feel safe in emotional uncertainty. They can create uncertainty for you, but they don't like sitting in it themselves. They can disappear and leave you guessing, but when you disappear and they are the one guessing, it activates their deepest fear, the fear of being left first. They are often terrified of rejection, but they manage it by rejecting first, by detaching first, by creating distance first. That way, they never have to face the full vulnerability of being the one who was abandoned. So when you truly step back, the discomfort is their system realizing, I can't control this anymore. And that's why it's so intense. They are not just missing you. They are missing certainty. They are missing their usual emotional leverage. They are missing the predictability of your pursuit. And because that predictability is gone, the brain starts replaying. What did I do? Did I push too far? Are they done? Is there someone else? Why are they so quiet? Notice what's happening. Their mind is now doing what your mind used to do. Your mind used to analyze their silence. Now their mind is analyzing yours. That role reversal is the beginning of consequence. It's the first time they taste the uncertainty they created. It's the first time they feel the power shift. And discomfort has a way of turning into obsession if it isn't resolved. Not romantic obsession at first, but mental looping. They reread the last conversation. They remember the last time you tried. They replay the moment you went quiet. They wonder if you're angry, if you're hurt, if you're over them. And because they hate vulnerability, they rarely come directly with accountability. They come with a test, a breadcrumb, something small, something safe, something that gives them information without requiring them to expose their heart. If you respond too fast, you relieve their discomfort. They feel safe again. The open loop closes. And once the loop closes, they often retreat, because the discomfort was the engine that brought them back, not deep change. That's why the first layer of regret can look like inconsistency. They reach out, then vanish. They appear, then disappear. They poke, then pull back. Because the goal was never to repair at first, the goal was to regulate. But if you hold your boundary, if your silence is consistent, the discomfort has nowhere to go. It grows. It deepens. It starts pushing them toward reflection. Because when they can't get immediate reassurance, their mind is forced to sit with the consequences longer. They start noticing the emptiness. They start feeling the gap in their routine. They start missing the warmth they took for granted. And slowly, discomfort becomes something heavier. It becomes loss. And that's when regret begins to transform from a nervous system itch into a real emotional reckoning. But it always starts with discomfort, because discomfort is the first crack in the avoidance armor. It's the first sign that the pattern is broken and that you are no longer available to keep them comfortable. The memory becomes a mirror, and that's when regret stops being a mild discomfort and becomes something that can actually shake them. Because discomfort is about access, but a mirror is about identity. Discomfort says, I miss the feeling of them being there. A mirror says, I need to face who I was while they were there. And avoidance can run from feelings for a long time, but it's much harder to run from a mirror once it starts reflecting the truth. At first, their mind returns to you in small flashes, not a full movie, just scenes. A moment of your kindness, a time you showed patience, the way you tried to communicate without attacking, the way you softened when they were sharp, the way you stayed calm when they were confusing. And these scenes don't just feel sweet, they feel heavy, because now they are framed by one fact: you are no longer there. When you were present, those moments were easy for them to overlook. They could take you for granted because your love was still available. They could dismiss your needs because you were still trying. They could postpone accountability because the relationship still had oxygen. But when you stop explaining, when you stop chasing, when you stop offering endless access, those same moments come back with a different meaning. They come back like evidence. Evidence that you were real. Evidence that you were consistent. Evidence that you gave something rare, and in the quiet, they begin to realize that the way they treated you wasn't just normal relationship conflict. It was a pattern of emotional avoidance that cost them someone valuable. This is what the mirror does. It highlights the contrast. It shows them your effort next to their detachment. It shows them your loyalty next to their inconsistency. It shows them your tenderness next to their coldness. And the contrast is brutal because they can't escape it with excuses anymore. They can't say, they were too much, when they remember how gentle you were. They can't say, they were dramatic, when they remember how often you tried to stay mature. They can't say, they pushed me, when they remember how often you gave them space while still showing love. So what happens? Their mind starts replaying, and replaying becomes reckoning. They remember the time you reached out and they responded late. They remember the time you asked for clarity and they changed the subject. They remember the time you were hurting and they went silent. They remember the time you forgave them and they didn't appreciate it. And now those memories hit like a weight, because the mind is connecting cause and effect. It's seeing the line between their behavior and your absence. This is where the sentence forms in their head, the sentence that destroys their peace. I might have lost someone rare. And that sentence is painful because it forces them to confront value. You weren't just a person. You were stability. You were warmth. You were emotional safety. You were the one who tried. And people like that don't come around often. Avoidants often act like they can replace anyone, but deep down they know the difference between attention and devotion. They know the difference between someone who likes them and someone who holds them down. They know the difference between casual affection and real loyalty. And once the mirror shows them you were loyal in a way they didn't honor, regret deepens. But here's the twist, and this is important. When the memory becomes a mirror, it doesn't always make them run toward you. Sometimes it makes them freeze. Because now the regret is not just sadness, it's shame. They start imagining what you must think of them. They start imagining your anger. They start imagining your silence as judgment. They start imagining that if they reach out, they'll be rejected, exposed, confronted. And avoidants fear confrontation because confrontation feels like vulnerability with consequences. So they often hover. They lurk. They test. They send crumbs. They look for signs you're still soft. They look for proof you'll still accept them. Because they want relief from the mirror without facing the full truth of what the mirror is showing. And this is where your power matters. Because if you respond too quickly, you give them relief without repair. You give them comfort without accountability. You let them escape the mirror. But if you hold steady, the mirror keeps working. The regret keeps deepening, not because you're punishing, but because reality is finally being felt. Ladies and gentlemen, the mirror is the moment they stop seeing you as someone they can manage and start seeing you as someone they damaged. It's the moment they realize your love wasn't guaranteed. It's the moment they recognize the cost of their avoidance. And when that recognition hits, the regret becomes real, because now it's not about losing attention. It's about losing a person who was rare enough to love them through their worst. Some avoidants don't apologize clearly, not because they don't feel regret, but because regret turns into shame, and shame paralyzes them. Regret says, I did something wrong. Shame says, something is wrong with me. And for an avoidant, that difference is everything. Regret could push them toward repair, but shame pushes them toward hiding. It makes them defensive, distant, quiet, or strangely casual when the situation calls for honesty. They want relief from the pain of what they did, but they don't want to face the vulnerability required to repair it. So instead of coming to you with a clean apology, they come to you sideways. That's why the return often looks weak. How have you been? A meme, a like on your story, a random question they could have answered themselves. It's not that they have nothing to say. It's that they're terrified of saying the real thing. Because the real thing would require them to admit impact. It would require them to admit they were inconsistent, unfair, cold, dismissive, or emotionally absent. It would require them to acknowledge that you suffered while they protected themselves, and that acknowledgement threatens their identity. Avoidants often build their self-image around being fine, independent, unbothered, rational. They don't like to see themselves as someone who hurts people. They don't like to see themselves as someone who fails at emotional responsibility. So when regret rises, their nervous system tries to protect the ego, and the ego creates a strategy: minimize, justify, avoid the hard conversation, and test the waters instead. Because tests are safer than truth. A breadcrumb lets them measure your emotional availability without risking rejection. It lets them ask, do you still want me? Without admitting, I miss you. It lets them check, can I come back? Without saying, I know I hurt you. It's a move that gives them information with very little vulnerability. And when you've been longing for accountability, those breadcrumbs can feel like the beginning of a breakthrough. But often, they're the beginning of a loop. Here's what shame does behind the scenes. Shame makes them imagine your reaction before they even reach out. They picture you angry. They picture you confronting them. They picture you calling them out. They picture you saying, where were you when I needed you? And even if you would be calm, their mind creates the worst-case scenario because avoidants fear emotional confrontation. Not because they're weak, but because confrontation feels like being trapped in feelings they can't regulate. So they take the easy path. They act casual so they don't look guilty. They act light so they don't have to go deep. They act like nothing happened so they don't have to carry the weight of what happened. And this is where the relationship becomes dangerous for you if you don't see it. Because a casual return can pull you back into closeness without repair. It can make you feel chosen again without being respected. It can restart intimacy without accountability. And if you accept that you teach them something powerful and painful, they can hurt you, disappear, and come back without owning the damage. You become the person who absorbs the cost of their avoidance so they don't have to. That's why the most important skill is learning to tell the difference between shame-based reaching and real repair. Shame-based reaching says, hey, repair says, I know I hurt you. Shame-based reaching wants comfort quickly. Repair understands trust takes time. Shame-based reaching gets annoyed when you bring up the past. Repair invites the past into the conversation so it can be healed. Shame-based reaching is inconsistent, on and off, hot and cold. Repair is steady, patient, and accountable. Now listen carefully, because this is where you take your power back. You don't have to punish them. You don't have to be rude. But you do have to be clear, because clarity forces the truth out of hiding. If they truly regret how they treated you, they will not run from a calm standard. They might feel uncomfortable, yes, but they will rise. They will show effort. They will show consistency. They will show willingness to talk about impact. They won't ask you to pretend nothing happened. But if they only want relief from guilt, if they only want reassurance that they're not the bad guy, they will resist standards. They will disappear when you ask for accountability. They will make you feel too much again. They will try to reset instead of repair. And that is the proof that the shame is still in control, not love. Ladies and gentlemen, shame is the reason some avoidants hover instead of healing. It's the reason they breadcrumb instead of apologize. It's the reason they test instead of commit. And your job is not to rescue them from shame by accepting half effort. Your job is to protect yourself so strongly that if they come back correctly. Because regret is not proven by a message. Regret is proven by responsibility. Their regret is not your responsibility. And this is the line that separates healing from relapsing. Because when you've been hurt, especially by someone who acted cold and then suddenly starts feeling it, it's easy to slip into a role that feels loving but is actually self-abandonment. The rescuer. You start thinking, if they regret it, maybe I should help them. If they're hurting now, maybe I should soften. If they finally realized, maybe this is my chance. And without noticing, you move from being the person who was mistreated into being the person who carries the emotional consequences for the one who mistreated you. But listen carefully, regret without change is just a feeling. And feelings come and go. Regret can flare up at night and vanish in the morning. Regret can show up when they're lonely and disappear when they feel safe again. Regret can be real and still be useless if it doesn't produce accountability, consistency, and repair. So if you make their regret your responsibility, you end up building your future on a temporary emotion instead of a stable foundation. This is why so many people get trapped in the cycle again. The avoidant reaches out, sounding soft, sounding emotional, sounding like they finally get it. The viewer thinks, this is the apology I waited for. They respond with warmth, they open the door, they give access, and the avoidant's nervous system instantly relaxes because the fear of losing you has been soothed. They feel relief. And relief is dangerous because relief can look like love for a moment. It can make both people believe the connection is healing when it's actually resetting. But a reset is not repair. A reset is when they want everything to feel good again without acknowledging the damage. Repair is when they are willing to face what happened, honor your feelings, and rebuild trust slowly. If you don't know the difference, you'll accept a reset because it feels better than pain. You'll accept a reset because you miss them. You'll accept a reset because you want closure. And then, weeks later, the same pattern returns. The distance, the vagueness, the inconsistency. Because the core issue was never addressed, it was only covered with temporary closeness. So when I say their regret is not your responsibility, I'm saying this: you are not the therapist of the person who wounded you. You are not the rehabilitation center for someone's emotional immaturity. You are not required to accept half effort just because they finally feel guilty. Guilt is not a relationship plan. Shame is not a commitment. Missing you is not proof they can love you well. Your responsibility is to your peace. And peace is not built by chasing someone's regret. Peace is built by requiring standards that protect you whether they come back or not. Here's what happens when you truly take this in. You stop being impressed by words. You stop being hypnotized by late realizations. You stop being moved by the emotional wave that hits them once they feel you slipping. Because you understand a truth that changes everything. Avoidants often feel most emotional when access is threatened. Not when they are stable, not when they are secure, but when they are scared. And fear can produce intense messages. Fear can produce promise. But fear does not always produce consistency. So instead of asking, do they regret it? You start asking, do they repair it? Do they take responsibility without excuses? Do they show up consistently over time, not just one night? Do they make space for your feelings without calling you too much? Do they respect your pace instead of rushing you back into closeness? Do they accept boundaries without punishing you? Do they change behavior, not just mood? Because if they truly regret it, they won't just want you back. They'll want to rebuild you. They'll want to rebuild your trust. They'll want to rebuild the safety they destroyed. And they will understand that you don't earn that with a single conversation, you earn it with repeated effort. Now, some people hearing this will feel scared because it means you might lose them. Yes, and that fear is exactly why people take on responsibility that isn't theirs. They think, if I make it easy, they'll stay. But making it easy for someone to be inconsistent doesn't create love, it creates entitlement. It teaches them they can return without repair. It teaches them they can hurt you and still keep you. And that is not love, that is a contract where you pay the emotional cost and they receive the comfort. So the healthiest mindset is this: if they regret it, let the regret do its job. Let it mature them. Let it push them toward accountability. Do not rescue them from it. Because if you rescue them from their regret, you interrupt the growth that regret could produce. You give them relief without responsibility. And once they feel relief, the urgency to change fades. Ladies and gentlemen, you are not here to be someone's lesson at the cost of your life. You are not here to keep explaining until someone finally becomes ready. Your love is not supposed to be an audition. Your heart is not supposed to be a waiting room. If they are truly different, they will meet your standards. If they are not, your standards will protect you. And that is why their regret is not your responsibility. Because your responsibility is not to make them feel better about how they treated you. Your responsibility is to make sure you never accept that treatment again.